go forward. So today we have with us representatives from the Walls Administration, from the Department of Labor and Industry, and Minnesota OSHA's Consultants Group. Nicole Blissenbach is the Assistant Secretary of the Minnesota Department of Labor and Industry, affectionately referred to as Dolly. And she'll be talking today about elements of these plans and also taking your questions. And she has with her as well, Brecca Cheetah, who is Minnesota's OSHA's consultancy group on workplace safety consultation. Two of them are well-versed in the importance of designing adequate safety plans and can also answer your questions today to help make sure that you understand how to design one for your business. Sometimes the executive orders can appear rigid, and many times working with the Department of Labor and Industry and the other commissioners and their staffs, we're able to bring an understanding to the specifics of the executive orders and the guidance that surround them, so that businesses can go forward and make sure that they get their plans done correctly. So a little bit of rules of the road here today. I'm going to turn it over to Nicole and Brecca, and they'll have some comments about preparedness plans and processes that surround those, and we're going to have the opportunity to ask questions of them today via your chat function on your Zoom bar at the bottom of your computer screen or your iPad screen. So you can type in your question. We'll be monitoring those, or you can raise your hand, your virtual hand. We'll be monitoring that, and we can turn to you. All mics are muted except for our guests, of course. Katie will be working with me to unmute your mic if you have a specific question you want to pose directly. Otherwise, you can type in the chat bar your question. So also, I might point out, we love our friends from the media. So if you are a reporter that are with us here today, we would remind you that this webcast is off the record. We want to have an honest dialogue and not have any of this show up in local media outlets. So if you're a member of the media and you would like to have an on-the-record conversation, please connect with the Chamber staff and we'll make sure to help you out going forward. So without further ado, let me introduce Nicole. Nicole Blissenbach, again, is DLI's Assistant Commissioner for Enforcement and Compliance Strategies and Partnerships. She provides leadership and direction on DLI's enforcement and compliance strategy and develops partnerships with labor law enforcement agencies at the state, local, and federal levels. Nicole previously worked at Education Minnesota and as an attorney with the law firm of Miller O'Brien Cummins, where she represented individual employees and labor unions. She's a graduate of the University of Minnesota Morris and earned her law degree from the University of Minnesota. And let me introduce Brecca as well. Brecca Cheetah she's an ergonomist and industrial hygienist for Minnesota's OSHA's consultative group, workplace safety consultation she provides. Prior to working for the Minnesota Department of Labor, she was a private consultant in industrial hygiene and ergonomics. Becca was also worked as a health compliance officer and senior member of the ergonomics team at OSHA in the North Carolina Department of Labor. So Nicole and Brecca, thank you for being with us. Please share some opening comments and we'll go to questions. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much for having us. I'll start out by, and I think it's funny that you talked about the Dolly, affectionately referred to as Dolly, because that's how I've always referred to the department. And then once I actually came to the department, I had to change my lingo to refer to it as DLI within the department. So I actually appreciate it when I hear Dolly. That's how I know it. So I'll start off by saying, just kind of giving a little bit of history. I know that this webinar, Zoom conference call, is really focused on the preparedness plans and the industry guidance that is posted on the staysafe.mn.gov website, which you'll hear me say that website numerous times probably throughout this call, and it's an important one to remember. As Doug mentioned, earlier on in the peacetime emergency, when non-critical sector businesses were closed, were not operating, one of the steps that we took when starting to reopen businesses was to require those businesses before they reopened to develop a written COVID-19 preparedness plan. And that was a requirement only for those businesses that had been closed by previous executive orders and were reopening. That those COVID-19 preparedness plans had to address a number of different safety and health protocols in the workplace. So specifically, they had to address OSHA standards, MDH, and CDC guidelines. And when we took that step to require that, we here at the Department of Labor and Industry, in consultation with the Department of Health, as well as DEED, developed a COVID-19 preparedness plan template. That template, is on our website. It's also on that Stay Safe website. Also, I think it's also on the DEED website. You can find it in a number of locations. But that template was really meant to be a guide to make sure that all businesses could the safety and health protocols in a manner that was laid out and easy to follow, and hopefully provided a little bit of a course, fill in the blank type of document. So that document was there, as well as industry guidance for those businesses that were reopening. As we got further along, there were many questions about, why are we requiring these written preparedness plans in certain industries but not in others? And it was determined that it was really better to have everybody kind of on the same page, so that we knew, even though all businesses, including critical sector, were required to follow OSHA standards and CDC and MDH guidelines, to make sure that what they were implementing in the work site was written down, so not only workers could see what it is, but to also ensure that all of those different issues and ways to ensure safety were thought about and implemented in the work site. So in Executive Order 20-74, there was a requirement built in to require those critical sector businesses that had not been covered by the requirement to have a written preparedness plan to have a written preparedness plan that conformed with CDC, MDH, and OSHA standards, to have that in place by June 29th. So we are now a little bit after that, and have been fielding many questions, and I'm sure many of the questions that we'll receive today are the types of questions that we've been receiving. But those, so in addition to that template, there has been developed with MDH and DLI industry guidance in a number of different industries that have been deemed critical sector. So manufacturing, construction, agriculture, all of those different industries now have guidance documents that are on the industry page of the staysafe.mn.gov website, and are out there for businesses to use and to consult as they are developing the written preparedness plan. So one of the questions that I get often is, so where do we send the plan once we have it developed? And I'm going to just address that one right away. The plan does not need to be submitted to state government. We would be buried and would not be able to get through all of those. But the plan does need to be posted in the work site and also provided to employees so that they can receive the training about what they are expected to do, whether that's disinfecting, whether that's personal hygiene. So employees do know what their part is in keeping the workplace safe from COVID-19. So in development of this guidance, we were able to learn, and this is where I'm going to say thank you to all of you businesses and the chamber for giving us input, for really hearing what the best practices have been, what's working, what's not, what are the things that need particular attention. I'm on a number of calls with business leaders, and it is really it's been really great hearing the feedback about the great ideas and the creativity that businesses are employing in the work site to keep people safe. And so we have learned from that, and we are better in our efforts because of what we are hearing from all of you. So thank you for that. But that's just basically a little bit of the history of how we got to the place where we are, and a little bit of the reasoning for the requirement to have a preparedness plan and have that in the work site with access to it from workers, to both build that worker confidence and also, as Doug mentioned earlier, that consumer confidence, which is key to really starting to rebuild our economy. So with that, I am happy to hand it back over, and so we can start with questions.
Great, thank you, Nicole. Very helpful. Let me just kick off with just one fundamental question about the preparedness plans or safety plans. So incidentally, by the way, I will point out that and this is not a critique, this is just my view of the words used. All businesses are critical. So we refer to this sometimes as exempted versus not exempted businesses, those that were exempted from the closures versus those that were allowed to remain open. And it's those that were exempted that are now required to do a preparedness plan. So this is my question. They're required to prepare a plan, but they're not required to submit them. And the templates are guidance on how you design an adequate plan. Is that correct? If I summarize it correctly?
Yeah, that is correct. So the template, in and of itself, it's not a required form. The having a plan and having a plan that addresses all of the things that are required, that the guidance lays out for that industry, that's what's required. Having the written plan and making sure the written plan addresses all of the required elements in the guidance. The template, yes, is a template form that can be used. We try to make it easy to follow and easy to implement. So I do think it is a helpful document, but there are parts of the template that are not going to be applicable to certain businesses. And there are parts of the guidance that won't be applicable. So that's why it really the plans do need to be individualized. The business needs to look through it to see what applies and what doesn't apply and kind of move through it that way.
Great, that's really helpful from an overall standpoint. Let me just ask you, Nicole and Brecca as well, as you've gone about reviewing the plans and taking questions, in my experience in talking to member businesses that have engaged in designing their plans, I found the businesses that engage in a conversation with their workers around designing the plan helps foster a sense of buy-in amongst the culture of that business. And can you speak to that as you've witnessed that? Have you seen that as well as a thoughtful approach in designing and then also building an understanding? And that helps also with training as it relates to engaging workers.
So I'll start, and then I'll turn it over to Brecca because she does hear, she does handle a lot of the phone calls that come into OSHA consultation. So we would always encourage talking to the different people in the different aspects of your business, because I know that at DLI, I know my job well, but I don't know the job of the people who are handling phones or the people who are at the front desk or the people who are out doing, inspections, whether that be a labor standards or an OSHA inspection. So in order for me to really understand all of the things I need to address in a plan, I need to talk to my workers to know what they are experiencing in their jobs. And you will have a more complete plan and be able to prepare for more of those, more of the different things that come up if you are talking to your workers. And then buy-in is the second piece, that yes, if you can have that conversation, explain to workers why certain steps are necessary, you will have a workforce that, one, is happy to help comply, and two, feels safer coming to work, which we all know are key to
Right.
running a successful business. So I'll let Brecca talk about what she's hearing in phone calls from different businesses.
Yeah, and I'll say that I definitely second that, Nicole. Any aspect of safety and health, the more communication you have with your employees, the better it's going to be for your company overall, because they're going to come to you with information, and you're going to get information from them that you need to make your business better. So those are really important aspects of any safety and health program, but they're also really important right now, because you need to know, okay, what's happening in my business, and are there things that I didn't know about that are problematic? So that communication piece is really huge for businesses right now.
Great, thank you to both of you. We have some questions that have come in, and I'll just take them in the order. And then I also have one that came in by email that I'll jump back to here, but just real quick. There's guidance in there about of individuals gathering, whether it be for training or staff meetings or what have you. But then there's also guidance in other executive orders around gathering outside. So it's indoor, it's 10. What's the limits on outdoor gatherings as it relates to business practices? And how does the guidance or preparedness plans speak to that?
So I
Thanks,
got it. I have to look at the Stay Safe guide the same as everybody else, because there's a lot going on with how many people can gather and how they can gather, and there's different occupancy limits. So gatherings in social settings outdoors are 25 or less, and gatherings indoors are 10 or less. And then in some of the businesses some of the early on language was that 10 or less, mimicking that social settings of indoors. And now we're, I think, moving towards a social distancing requirement with those types of meetings. So, but I'm not sure if that guidance has been updated yet or not. So that may not be up yet. But if you're looking at entertainment, there's also going to be different guidance documents where you're looking at 6 feet social distancing with a maximum of 250, and inside it's going to be an occupancy, a capacity, depending on the type of environment you're in. So I look at the Stay Safe Minnesota grid just to get an overview quickly what those gathering sizes are and what they are by different setting, which helps.
And I can add to that a little bit. So I think the key is two things. There are two keys. The first is the capacity limits that apply to certain places. So like a personal services, a hair salon, that's going to have there will be a capacity limit that you need to look at, and then maintaining the social distance. And then where, like in personal services, where you're unable to maintain that social distance, there are additional precautions. So face mask wearing, potentially face shield, if the mask can't be worn for certain services. And I was just picking personal services as the one that's, I think, the easiest to kind of envision. So there is one of the FAQs, which you can also find on the Stay Safe website, does address the meeting size. And really the key with the meeting size is to, number one, don't go over the capacity limit that applies to your industry. And number two, maintain that 6 feet of social distancing. So if you're doing those two things, then those are gonna be the keys for meetings.
So, and that's when you use a commercial venue or basically a venue that is privately owned, like a meeting space, right?
Yes, but in some businesses there are also capacity limits. So if if you're having a meeting in a stick with personal service in a salon, you shouldn't bring all of your staff back if you're over the 50% capacity. You should then make sure that you're at the 50% capacity and maintain the social distancing.
Okay, let's switch to a question around employees that contract COVID. What are the requirements for a business if one or more of the employees contract COVID? In other words, they've tested positive. What are the requirements? I guess I'm interpret the question what's the expectation and are the requirements on the business as far as reporting that or managing staff expectation?
Yes, so I'll start out with kind of talking about the contact tracing procedure that is currently used by MDH. So when an individual does test COVID positive, they then start the process with the individual to do the contact tracing. Part of that will be to work with that person to determine who the employer is. Typically, I know when testing is occurring, if people are being asked to sign a waiver that allows their employer to be notified if they test positive. My understanding from the Department of Health is that most of the individuals do sign that. So they are able to inform an employer when an employee of theirs tests positive, along with identifying who that person is. So that once that happens, the contact tracer, which will usually either be through Department of Health or the local public health agency, which usually is the county in greater Minnesota, will contact the employer and talk to them about who has come in contact with the individual within a certain time period for a certain length of time, and I believe it's 15 minutes is that length of time. And we'll then branch out and start contacting people who have been in contact with the person who tested positive in that time period for that length of time.
And Nicole, is the contact with those individuals that were exposed for 15 minutes or more, who does that tracing, or that contact, or informing those other individuals, which could be employees? Whose responsibility is that?
So that is done by the Department of Health or the local public health agency. They, I believe, have been, because of maybe not having, there's a need for contact tracers, and I believe Department of Health is hiring a bunch of people. But they have been working with employers to help kind of shorten the time for determining maybe who has been in contact with people if they've had the employee sign that waiver. So they are reaching out to employers to kind of help with that process. So they're not only relying on the employee to determine who may have come in contact with them. Okay. So employers can quickly identify, okay, here is the list of employees that work in that area. Here's their contact information. So then
the tracer with MDH would do that contact. It's not the responsibility of the employer.
Yes, that is the last I've heard from MDH. That is my understanding, is that they do that contact tracing and that informing. And then the Department of Health would inform someone if they would be subject to quarantine during that time period for however long since they were initially exposed. And then that triggers a number of things, which, could include leave, it could include, any number of other things that come up when somebody needs to be placed in quarantine. So that's really the process. The things I think it's important for employers to remember with that is, number one, maintaining private data of your employees. Any privacy health information is considered private. So you don't want to, if you find out that Nicole tested COVID positive, you don't want to send an email saying Nicole has tested COVID positive. That would be potentially a problem. So informing workers that an employee has tested positive, but keeping the identity of the person private is something that may be an option, depending on the size of your workforce. But just making sure you're keeping that health data confidential is important.
Okay, that's very helpful. And you covered a number of questions that had come in with that answer. So thank you, Nicole and Brecca. Also, here's one regarding record keeping requirements. This comes from Clara with the Electrical Association. She says her members are electricians who may be on 10 different job sites in a day. Could be residential sites or commercial, I guess. So are they supposed to track the health of their customers? Are there software recommendations that you can make to keep confidential records? And how long should they maintain these records?
So
this is a question I've
is,
not seen before. So
yeah, and that's
Go ahead,
probably more
go
of a
ahead.
Department of Health question, but Brecca,
Okay.
do you know?
So with record keeping, if you're talking about OSHA record keeping, then you're going to have employees that visit sites, and there is an enforcement memorandum for determining work-related safety and health. I'm sorry, work-related recordable injuries and illnesses. So COVID-19 obviously would be a recordable injury. There isn't any software that I know of, and if you're visiting multiple sites, that's going to present a challenge of trying to figure out exactly where it came from. But it would be an item that you record, and you would keep those records for 5 years for the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and 3 years is the look back time for OSHA compliance. So those OSHA 300 logs would be data that you keep for that period of time. You're going to update them throughout the year and make sure that you have everything on there. And there is some information on the OSHA enforcement memorandum on kind of the steps to take if you're trying to determine if something's work related, because it's going to be a little bit challenging, particularly with something where we have community spread, and particularly when you're visiting multiple sites.
And I should note that that memorandum is on our website. The record keeping memorandum that came out from federal OSHA is on our website and available.
is that on DLI's website, Nicole, or on the staysafemn.gov website?
It's actually on DLI's website, not on the Industry Guidance Stay Safe website. So
Great.
I'll direct people to our website on that
Great.
one.
Thank
But
you.
I did want to say, I feel like the question may have, that's one aspect of the question. My guess is that maybe the other aspect of that question had to do with how long to keep records of where people were for contact tracing, or because everything Brecca said is relevant if you have an employee that that would test positive for OSHA recording purposes. But as far as an employer's responsibility to keep records related to who they may have come in contact with, you know, I think that's a different question. So I don't know if that was the intent, but I'll talk a little bit more about that. You know, that's part of the reason why, as restaurants opened up, as salons opened up, and more of those types of businesses opened up, for the need for reservations rather than walk-ins, was if there is you know, a positive test, it's an easy way to then look at records to inform people who may have been in contact with the employee, or to inform the business if a person may have been there that tested COVID positive. So, but as far as how long to keep those records, I don't think there is anything in the executive orders that says how long those need to be maintained. So my guess would be after the period of incubation would be over, which I believe is 14 days. And if you haven't been notified, that would be kind of the end of it. But it's also, symptoms can show up, might take a while for people to get tested, and so on and so forth. So that's the reason behind the reservations, is so that the contact tracing can be made a little bit easier.
So a reasonable period of time, but nothing as long as 3 to 5 years under the OSHA guidance. So, all right, that's helpful. Thank you. Here's a question related to office work, and this is something that we've been receiving quite a bit. So it's a little bit outside the preparedness plans, but it applies to all businesses, particularly those that have office environments. So right now, here's a question from Sarah. Right now, an employee can work from home, work from home. How long is that going to stay in effect? Question that we're getting frequently. Or will there be some flexibility in how that is defined? Just as an example, she says, what if almost all members of a team need to be in the office for a day and the team manager determines that they should have a safe in-person all-team meeting? So in other words, there may be cases where you can't work from home, you need to be in the office. Can that apply to such as a team meeting? And then the broader question is, how long are we expecting the restrictions on working from home for office work? So Nicole, I don't know if you can tackle that or not, but take a shot.
Yes, I can. And I can't provide any specific timelines because nothing has been decided on this, but I can assure people that this is an ongoing conversation. You know, and as the question asker pointed out, right now the executive order says that if an employee can work from home, they must work from home. So in the conversations, I can kind of give a flavor of what we're talking about. You know, are there certain people who we would want to keep that requirement for? So if you fall in a at-risk category and you're able to work from home, does it make sense to keep that requirement for those folks? Those are the types of things we're talking about. And it is an active conversation. I don't know when that requirement will officially change, but those conversations continue to happen and will continue to happen. And that is an area I think that makes sense to be some of the next movement without a date attaching to that, because I'm not the final decider of dates.
Yeah, and we've been hearing quite a bit about it, and some confusion that existed, particularly around the beginning of that executive order, where expected to stay from home, and increasingly conversation around, well, I can't do parts of my job from home. Part of my job needs to be in the office. So continued evolution of that and progress, I think, to bring clarity and some flexibility at the same time so businesses can operate effectively, yet maintaining safety through the workplace. So progress there, I think, and more clarity will be appreciated. And we've been getting that as well, but at the same time, we'd like to see progress in that area. Here's a question from Hannah. If an employee has been to a recent hotspot, meaning maybe a business or community or town, has told the employee they're getting tested, can the employer ask for results of the test? Or is the employee in charge of relaying the information? Interesting question.
So and this is probably okay, so MDH does not have any requirements related or regarding quarantine after traveling. That's not a current requirement they have. So, because I have received that question before. If my employee comes back after they travel, are they required to quarantine for any period of time? The answer right now is no. CDC, neither the CDC nor MDH require quarantine after traveling. So the second part of the question, could I ask? That I would have to probably defer to the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. I do know that the EEOC has issued some guidance that, well, typically an employer required test that is not work related would violate the ADA. But they have, in their guidance, they have said that because we are in a pandemic, that an employer required test could be for COVID is work related. So employers can require testing. Now, I'm not sure how many employers will go down that path, because if they require the testing, there is a Minnesota law that says you have to pay, the employer has to pay for it. And then obviously the test results would again be confidential health data on an employee that can't be shared. So in that same category, the EEOC has also said, you know, it's okay for employers to take temperatures of employees, to ask those health questions, the health questionnaires that many places are utilizing and have been suggested and highly recommended. to include that for employees as they're coming into work. So that all of that the EEOC has said will not violate the ADA, and MDHR, the Department of Human Rights, has followed suit on that guidance.
Okay, thank you. Here's a similar question regarding hotspots, if you will, or an outbreak in a business. So let's say you're in manufacturing, and the question relates to, if you find that you have an outbreak in your business, what's the best process for a business to undertake in working with the state, Department of Health, BLI, or OSHA, should that occur? What's the process, and how do they gain assistance for purposes of managing that outbreak?
So I know that when in cases where we have had hotspots or outbreaks in different businesses, that when the Department of Health responds to that, they have worked with employers to look at what their current protocols are and how to institute, how to add additional protocols to ensure safety and health in the workplace. And so the Department of Health has worked on that. The disinfectant protocol is that's something that does need to be addressed in the preparedness plans. So all of the different industry guidance has that aspect to them. And Breck, I don't know if can you talk a little bit more about that and how that is addressed in the guidance?
Sure, I'm just getting my video up. So each of the guidance has to address how they're going to disinfect and clean their facility. There are different reasons for disinfecting. Mostly it's disinfecting the frequently touched surfaces. We want to use an EPA list N appropriate SARS-CoV disinfectant that will work for you. You want to use it for the correct contact time. And then if you do have a case in your facility, the CDC does have guidance on disinfecting that area and the time frame in which it should be completed. So there's two different circumstances. There's the general day-to-day cleaning and then the disinfecting, and then there's also that when you have potential outbreak at your facility, and those guidelines CDC has on how to clean that area and when to clean that area, and what you need to do with ventilation and how long to wait. So
and Breck, correct me if I'm wrong, but that CDC guidance is linked at the end of the industry guidance that was prepared by MDH and DLI. Is that correct?
Yeah, we tried to put guidance in there so that if businesses were dealing with potential positive cases, resources that they could link in those guidelines to find, this is what we want you to do. This is how we want you to disinfect the area. This is how we want you to operate and increasing ventilation. So yeah, it's in there.
Okay, we have a follow-up question from Ann to the question I posed earlier from Hannah about hotspots. And Ann says, following up to Hannah's question, if an employee discloses they were in a group and later discovered someone in that group was positive and do not yet have test results for themselves, to what extent should they inform their clients or their colleagues? In this case, they work in a home or older adult setting and do not provide personal care or human touch work. So what's the responsibility, I guess, for reporting that and to their customers or clients, even though they're not tested positive yet? Do you have a sense of what's a recommendation on such a circumstance?
Yeah, I can talk to that. MDH has been putting up guidance on that very situation. So they have a guidance document on when to return to work. And there is a scenario, you were in close contact with someone with COVID-19, like a person in your household, but you are not sick. So the guidelines are for that to stay home from work or separate yourself from others, and do not share anything for 14 days. Work from home if you can, but if you're returning to the workplace, you do need to talk to your supervisor. If you can stay home, to stay home. And if you become sick, that you need to continue to stay home and then return to work after the 14 days. If you are not experiencing symptoms, you're going to basically want to monitor yourself. So MDH has those guidelines on their COVID-19 and return to work. And that's nice that they have that there for businesses to be able to look at on their COVID-19 and businesses information.
Great. Thank you, Brecca. We have one last question here, and it's more related to the Department of Labor and Industry, Nicole, and it relates to unemployment insurance. So it's a little off the topic today, but I think it's useful. When the federal government in its first or second COVID-related bill provided for 600 plus up or an additional $600 per week, and that is being discussed for an extension from the federal government. Can you give us a sense? Their question relates to how's the unemployment fund in Minnesota looking at this point? Maybe you have knowledge of this, maybe you don't, Nicole, but if there is an extension of the unemployment benefits, how's Minnesota's fund holding up? And so the question is, how will Minnesota proceed should an extension be offered? Do you have a feel for the standing of the unemployment fund in Minnesota, and how would we react to that?
So I can try to give a little bit of insight in this. Unemployment insurance falls under DEED's umbrella, not
right.
DLI's umbrella. But I have been in a number of conversations with Commissioner Grove, so I can try to give a little bit of insight. I believe that the additional $600 that was added, which was the pandemic unemployment insurance, what a piece of that currently expires at the end of July, and that was paid for through federal dollars, not through state unemployment insurance dollars. So that was an add-on and I believe it actually came as a separate, even a separate account transfer than the regular unemployment that comes from the Minnesota Unemployment Compensation Fund. So I don't think that has had an impact on the funds in the Minnesota Unemployment Fund. I think that's what the question was getting at.
So appreciate that, and yeah, I stand corrected. That is DEED's authority on unemployment benefits. So, but thank you for your clarification and offering some guidance on that. Certainly, we went into this with a healthy reserve in our unemployment accounts, and obviously there's been a big, large demand on it. And yes, the federal government has been supplementing it, but as employers, we obviously want to make sure that fund is in a healthy position, because it's an important shock absorber to economic downturns. And one of the reasons we continue to encourage the governor and the commissioners to continue to reopen as best we can. The less folks we have on unemployment, the stronger that account can remain, because who knows how long this is going to go on or what other circumstances we may face in the economy. So we are anxious to proceed with keeping our economy as strong as possible while also pushing back on the pandemic. So great way to end the program. We know that, Nicole, you have another event here kicking off in just a few minutes. So let me just say on behalf of the State Chamber, thank you to Nicole and Brecca for joining us. Thank you for all those that joined. A question came up earlier that yes, we did record the program. It will be available following. We'll put it up on our website as we have with other webinars that we've done. They all live happily on our website at mnchamber.com, and you can click on the COVID tab and you'll get to our toolkit where you'll find all the resources that the Minnesota Chamber has pulled together, much of which it relies on the state agencies as well as OSHA and CDC for our guidance and best practices and information on our webinars. So thank you again once for being with us, Nicole and Brecca. Nice job to you, and thank you to the administration for making your time today available to the business community. I want to thank our members for being with us today. Your participation in the Chamber and your support of this organization is very valued, and we always appreciate your input on how we continue to do a great job for you. I also want to thank the Chamber team who brought this together for us today. Thank you for all your great work. And as always, have a great day here in Minnesota and be safe, Minnesota businesses. Thank you once again. Have a great day.